It was a Friday evening when everything came crashing down. I got home early from work, feeling a bit more relaxed than usual. The kids were at a friend's house, and the house was eerily quiet. As I walked into the kitchen, I saw Anna's phone on the counter, vibrating with a new message. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about her messages. But something felt off. The screen lit up, revealing a preview. "Can't wait to see you again. Tom." I froze. Tom? As in, Tom Daniels, the principal of our kids' school? My stomach churned, and I picked up the phone. I opened the message thread, my hands shaking, and began scrolling. It was worse than I could have imagined. The texts weren't just flirty, they were explicit and passionate. Anna and Tom had been seeing each other for months behind my back. For a few moments, the world stopped. My mind raced through 12 years of marriage. The nights when Anna had said she was out with friends or working late. The times she'd come home, smiling but distant. It all started to make sense. She wasn't just distracted, she was with him. I couldn't breathe. Anger, betrayal, disgust, they all hit me at once. How could she do this to me? To our family? I dropped her phone on the counter as if it burned my hand. This wasn't just some mistake. This was deliberate, and I couldn't let it go unanswered. I walked out to the backyard, trying to calm myself down, but there was no calming down. The anger surged through me like fire, boiling over until all I could think about was revenge. I wasn't just going to end things with Anna. No, that was too easy. She needed to feel the same pain I did, and so did Tom. He needed to pay for destroying my family. I knew what I had to do. As the sun set and the sky darkened, my mind sharpened with focus. I wasn't going to confront Anna right away, and I wasn't going to let Tom walk away unscathed. No, I was going to take him down, piece by piece, just like he had done to my life. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up researching everything I could about Tom Daniels. I dug into his life, his role as principal, his reputation, his connections. I found hints of misconduct and rumors of questionable behavior. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about Anna anymore, this was about exposing Tom for the fraud he was. He thought he could betray me, betray my children, and get away with it. He was wrong. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. Tom Daniels wouldn't just lose Anna. He'd lose everything. And that was just the beginning. The days after discovering Anna's affair were surreal. Every morning, I woke up with the same hollow feeling, like a piece of me was missing. But I didn't let that stop me. I had a goal now, a mission. I'd never felt so clear-headed in my life. Tom Daniels was about to lose everything, just like I had. I kept my distance from Anna. She seemed to sense something was off, but she had no idea I knew about her and Tom. I played my role as the oblivious husband perfectly, nodding when she spoke. Pretending to listen, I was already a few steps ahead. My first move was simple, information. I needed dirt on Tom, something that would stick. I started by reaching out to parents from the school, casually, of course. At first, I framed it as a curiosity. I dropped a few vague comments about how Tom seemed too friendly with certain parents or how he liked to get a little too involved in school fundraisers. That's when the floodgates opened. Some of the parents told me Tom had a reputation. There were whispers about him having special relationships with a few moms at the school. Nothing anyone could prove, but enough to make people uneasy. Others mentioned how he seemed to favor certain students, making decisions that benefited families who were close to him. The more I heard, the more confident I became. This wasn't just about my wife. Tom was playing a dangerous game, and I was about to turn it against him. One evening, I sat down at my computer and started digging deeper. I found out that Tom had been using school funds for personal projects. He'd claimed to renovate the school gym, but I found receipts for purchases that had nothing to do with the gym, expensive dinners, luxury hotels. It wasn't hard to piece together that he'd been using the school's money to entertain his companions. I also started saving every text between him and Anna. If I was going to take him down, I needed concrete evidence of his relationship with my wife. Every message, every meeting they had, I saved and backed up. I knew once I had enough, I could ruin him both personally and professionally. But just exposing the affair wasn't enough for me. That would only embarrass him. I wanted him destroyed. I wanted his entire career in flames. My chance came a week later, during a school board meeting. I attended as a concerned parent, blending in with the crowd. When the topic of school budgeting came up, I raised my hand and asked a few innocent questions. Questions that I already knew the answers to. How exactly is the money being allocated for the new gym renovation? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Tom, sitting at the head of the meeting, gave me a polite smile, but I could see a flicker of annoyance cross his face. He clearly wasn't expecting someone to challenge him. Well, Mr. Michaels, the funds are being used to improve facilities for our students, of course, he responded, his voice steady. I didn't let it go. I've heard from a few parents that some of the expenses don't seem to add up. Could we get a breakdown of the costs? Tom's smile faltered. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I assure you, everything is above board. I nodded, pretending to accept his answer, but I knew I had just planted a seed of doubt in the room. By the end of the meeting, other parents were whispering among themselves, questioning Tom's integrity. That was the moment I realized just how easy it would be to tear his carefully crafted image apart. The following day, I sent an anonymous tip to the local newspaper. I laid it all out for them. Tom's misuse of funds, his inappropriate relationships with his parents, and his affair with Anna. I provided them with just enough proof to spark their interest. The texts between him and Anna would come later when the fire was already burning. A few days passed in silence, and I began to wonder if my plan had fallen through. But then, one morning, I opened my computer to find an article on the front page of the local news website, "School Principal Under Investigation for Financial Misconduct." I couldn't stop smiling. I watched as the story spread like wildfire through the town. Parents were outraged, demanding answers. The school board launched an official investigation, and Tom was placed on administrative leave. His reputation, once spotless, was now in shambles. I could only imagine the panic he must have felt as everything started to unravel. But this was just the beginning. Anna, of course, had no idea I was behind any of it. She spent her days nervously watching the news, trying to figure out what was happening. I knew she was worried about Tom, but I said nothing. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had completely destroyed him. For now, I stayed quiet, watching the chaos I had created unfold. The satisfaction I felt wasn't something I could easily describe. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was darker than that, like I had finally regained control in a situation where I'd been powerless for too long. And soon, it would be Anna's turn to face the consequences. The fallout from the investigation hit the town hard. The school board called an emergency meeting, and the whispers turned into full-blown accusations. Parents were demanding transparency, and Tom Daniels had no answers. Watching him squirm from the sidelines was almost too sweet. He was suspended from his position indefinitely. There was no official statement yet, but I knew the investigation had dug deep enough to uncover the financial discrepancies I had highlighted. The reporters were relentless, and every day, more dirt on Tom came to light. What had started as a quiet accusation snowballed into a scandal no one in town could ignore. The school's PTA was buzzing with rumors. Parents were outraged, especially the ones who had trusted Tom with more than just their children's education. I heard the gossip at the grocery store, in coffee shops, and even during school pickups. His affair with Anna hadn't been public knowledge yet, but it was only a matter of time. At home, Anna was falling apart. She'd been glued to the news for days, watching in horror as Tom's life crumbled. She was more distant than ever, barely speaking to me, lost in her thoughts. I could see the panic in her eyes whenever she caught a new headline. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to become a part of that story too. One evening, I decided to make my move. We were sitting in the living room, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Anna was staring at her phone, probably waiting for a message from Tom. Though those had stopped days ago. I took a deep breath, knowing this moment would change everything. "I know about you and Tom," I said, my voice calm but firm. Anna's head snapped up, her face draining of color. What are you talking about?" She stammered, trying to compose herself, but the guilt was already written all over her face. "Don't lie to me," I continued, standing up and walking towards her. "I know everything. I know about the affair. I know how long it's been going on. I've seen the texts, Anna." She looked like she was about to faint. For a second, she didn't say anything, just stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Then she whispered, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I replied coldly. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake, Josh. I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a bitter sound that even surprised me. A mistake? A mistake is something you do once. This wasn't a mistake, Anna. This was a choice. Over and over again. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, muttering apologies that meant nothing to me. But I didn't stop. I wasn't finished. Do you know what I've been doing while you've been sneaking around with him? She shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. I destroyed him, I said, the words coming out with a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. The financial scandal? The investigation? It's all because of me. I made sure everyone saw him for what he really was. And now, he's finished. Anna's sobs turned into something else, shock, disbelief. She looked up at me, her face wet with tears. You did this? Yes, I said, my voice steady. And you're next. Anna's world collapsed that night. After my confession, she stopped speaking. She didn't even try to argue or explain anymore. It was as if the weight of what she had done had finally crushed her. I had seen her broken before, but this was different. This was a woman who had nothing left to hold on to. I moved out of our bedroom the next day, but I didn't leave the house. Not yet. I wasn't done with my plan, and she needed to feel the full brunt of what she'd caused before I left her completely. It didn't take long for the town to turn against her. Once Tom's affair with Anna became public, the media frenzy intensified. The texts I had saved were leaked anonymously, and within days, everyone knew the truth. The concerned wife of Josh Michaels became a scandalous headline, and the story spread like wildfire through our community. I heard whispers wherever I went. People I had known for years looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment. They didn't know what to say to me, didn't know how to react. But I didn't care. Their opinions didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Anna was being held accountable for her betrayal. She started avoiding public places altogether. The shame was too much for her to bear. Friends she had once confided in stopped returning her calls. She lost her social circle overnight, and it was clear that people wanted nothing to do with her now that she was part of a town scandal. Tom's wife, Cheryl, filed for divorce within a week of the story breaking. I heard she had moved out of state with their 2 kids, trying to escape the humiliation. Tom, on the other hand, had become a ghost in the town he once ruled. He resigned before the investigation concluded, but that didn't stop the school board from pursuing legal action against him for misuse of funds. I watched from the sidelines as his life fell apart, bit by bit, just like mine had. But the difference was, I had made the choice to tear his life down. He hadn't expected the attack, and that made the victory even sweeter. At home, Anna barely spoke. She avoided eye contact and flinched whenever I was in the same room. But the house felt like a tomb now, full of silence and regret. I knew it was time to end things for good. I had gotten what I wanted. I had destroyed Tom, and Anna was a broken shell of the person she once was. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I finally sat down with Anna for the last time. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. There was no fight left in her. She knew what was coming. I'm filing for divorce, I said simply. She didn't even react, just nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this. I figured, she whispered. There's nothing left here, Anna. Nothing to save. She wiped at her face, but there were no tears this time. I know. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a twinge of something close to sadness. This wasn't the life I had imagined for us. I had loved her once, deeply. But the person sitting across from me now wasn't the woman I had married. She was someone else, someone I no longer knew. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. The kids will stay with me for now. We'll figure out the rest later. Anna didn't argue. She didn't even ask to fight for the kids. She just nodded again, like a prisoner accepting her sentence. As I walked away, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but now, standing on the other side of it, I wasn't sure what I had gained. All I knew was that the life I had known was gone. And it was time to start over, without her. The morning I left, the sky was overcast, fitting for the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. I packed my bags quietly, not wanting to wake the kids yet. I wasn't leaving them, not permanently, but I needed some time away. I needed to clear my head and figure out what came next. As I closed the door to the house, I glanced back one last time. Anna was still upstairs, probably pretending to sleep. She hadn't come down to say goodbye, and I hadn't expected her to. We were nothing more than 2 strangers now, tied together only by the kids and the shared wreckage of our former life. The drive felt longer than it was, the silence in the car pressing down on me like a weight. I was heading to stay with my brother for a few weeks while I sorted out the details of the divorce. I needed distance, from the house, from Anna, from everything that reminded me of what had happened. The revenge I had sought for so long was complete, but now that it was over, there was an emptiness that I hadn't anticipated. Tom was gone. The scandal had taken everything from him: his job, his family, his reputation. He'd left town a broken man, his name now synonymous with disgrace. Anna was a social pariah, and I had filed for divorce. From the outside, it might have looked like I'd won. But the truth was, standing on the other side of the revenge, I didn't feel victorious. I thought back to the man I had been before this all started, before Anna's betrayal, before I'd set my mind on destroying Tom. I wondered what that man would think of me now. Would he have approved of what I'd done? Or would he have been disgusted by the lengths I'd gone to? The truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. The first few days away from the house were a blur. I spent most of my time trying to distract myself with work, focusing on anything but the mess I had left behind. My brother, Greg, tried to get me to talk about it, but I wasn't ready. I didn't want to rehash everything, not yet. The kids stayed with Anna for the first week, though I made sure to check in on them. I could tell they were confused, struggling to understand why Dad wasn't coming home. They didn't know the full story, and I wasn't sure how much to tell them. They were too young to understand the complexities of betrayal and revenge. All they knew was that their world had been turned upside down, and I hated that I was part of the reason for it. As the days passed, I found myself replaying everything in my mind: the affair, the investigation, the confrontation with Anna. I had been so focused on punishing Tom that I hadn't really stopped to think about what came after. Now that the storm had passed, I was left standing in the ruins, unsure of where to go next. One night, after a few too many beers, I called Anna. I hadn't planned on talking to her, but something in me needed closure. I needed to hear her voice and understand why she had done what she did. She answered after a few rings, her voice soft and tired. "Josh?" she said, like she wasn't sure if it was really me. "Yeah, it's me," I replied, feeling the weight of the conversation already settling in. I don't know why I'm calling." There was a long pause on the other end. "I didn't expect to hear from you," she finally said. "I didn't expect to call," I admitted. I took a deep breath, unsure of how to start. "Why, Anna? Why did you do it?" She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, the sound of her trying to find the words. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I don't have a good reason, Josh. I was lonely, and I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking about you, or the kids, or anything. I was selfish. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I had expected some grand explanation, some reason that would help me understand. But all I got was the truth, simple, ugly, and empty." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am." I hung up the phone without responding. What could she say that would make any of this better? Weeks turned into months. The divorce was finalized without much of a fight. Anna didn't try to contest the custody agreement, and I kept the kids most of the time. She had fallen into a quiet existence, working a part-time job and keeping to herself. The town still whispered about her, but the noise had started to die down. People had their own lives to deal with, and the scandal that had rocked our small community was becoming yesterday's news. As for me, I tried to move forward. I focused on my job and poured myself into being a good father. The kids needed stability now more than ever, and I wasn't going to let them suffer any more than they already had. I kept things civil with Anna for their sake, but we rarely spoke beyond the logistics of the kids' schedules. The few times I saw her, she looked tired and sad, like a woman who had lost everything and didn't know how to get it back. I didn't hate her anymore. The anger that had fueled me for so long had burned out. In its place was something else, something more like acceptance, maybe even pity. I had punished her and Tom, and in doing so, I had punished myself. But I was done with revenge. It had cost me too much already. One afternoon, while I was picking up the kids from school, I ran into Cheryl, Tom's ex-wife. I hadn't seen her since everything went down, and I wasn't sure how she'd react. But when she saw me, she gave me a small smile, tired but genuine. "Josh," she said, walking over to where I was standing. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied, unsure of what to say. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged. "It's been rough, but we're managing. The kids are adjusting." She paused for a moment, then looked at me with a seriousness I wasn't expecting. I heard about everything, what you did. I tensed, waiting for her to accuse me, but instead, she sighed. I'm not mad at you, Josh. I don't know if I would have done the same thing, but I get it. Her words surprised me, and I wasn't sure how to respond. I'm sorry for what happened, I finally said. To you and your kids. Cheryl gave me a sad smile. We'll get through it, but you need to stop punishing yourself. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. We stood there in silence for a moment, watching the kids run out of the school building. It was a strange, fragile peace, but it was the first real peace I'd felt in a long time. As Cheryl walked away, I realized that she was right. It was time to stop punishing myself. I had gotten my revenge, but it hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. The past was behind me now, and the only thing left to do was move forward. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. The months that followed felt like a slow climb out of darkness. I was still getting used to the idea of being a single father, balancing work and parenting while trying to rebuild the pieces of my life that had been shattered. Some days were easier than others. On the good days, I felt like I was finally regaining control of my life. On the bad days, the weight of everything, Anna's betrayal, my obsession with revenge, the fallout, crept back in. I threw myself into my kids' lives, determined to give them some sense of normalcy. We had our routines: school drop-offs, soccer practices, movie nights. They didn't talk about their mom much, and I didn't push. They were adjusting, in their own way, to the new reality. I could see the sadness in their eyes sometimes, the confusion about why things had changed so drastically, but they were resilient. Kids always are. Anna was still in town, but we kept our distance. She would come by to see the kids on weekends, but the interactions between us were brief and formal. There were no more late-night phone calls. No attempts at apologies or explanations. It was as if we had both silently agreed that the damage was done, and there was no point in reopening old wounds. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, a beer in hand, thinking about how far I had come since everything had fallen apart. The anger, the need for revenge, had consumed me for so long, but now that it was gone, I was left with a different kind of emptiness. I had spent so much time focused on punishing Anna and Tom that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted for myself. I didn't know how to start over, how to move on from everything that had happened. But I knew I needed to. I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. One night, Greg called me. Hey, man, he said. You've been cooped up in that house for too long. It's time to get out and have some fun. I laughed. Fun? I barely remember what that is. I'm serious. Let's go grab a drink this weekend and catch up like old times. You need a break. I hesitated. It had been so long since I'd done anything for myself. But Greg was right. I needed to stop punishing myself, to start living again. Yeah, I finally said. Let's do it. That weekend, we went to a bar downtown. The kind of place we used to hang out at before life got so complicated. It felt strange at first, being out in the world again, but as the night wore on, I found myself relaxing, laughing at Greg's stories, letting the stress of the past year slip away, even if only for a few hours. We sat at the bar, nursing our drinks, when Greg asked, So, what's next for you? You've been through hell, but it's time to think about the future. I shrugged, taking a sip of my beer. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure things out. I don't really know what the future looks like anymore. Greg nodded, but he didn't press. He knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't ready for big plans yet. You'll get there, he said. One step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to feel more manageable. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it was becoming easier to carry. I was starting to rediscover myself outside of the roles of husband and father. I was still both, of course, but I was also just Josh, trying to figure out what that meant in this new chapter of life. One afternoon, I was picking up the kids from school when I noticed someone I hadn't seen in a long time, Emily Carter. She was one of the parents from my kids' class, someone I had known for years but never really talked to beyond polite greetings at school events. She had always seemed kind and reserved, and, like me, she was a single parent now. Her husband had left a few years back, and from what I'd heard through the grapevine, it had been rough on her. She caught my eye and smiled as she walked over, her son trailing behind her. Hey, Josh, she said, her voice warm but a little uncertain. "How have you been holding up?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question. "You know, one day at a time," I said, giving her a small smile. "It's been a lot. I can imagine," she said, nodding. "I've heard bits and pieces about everything that happened. I'm really sorry you had to go through all that." "Thanks," I replied, appreciating her sincerity. "It's been rough, but we're managing." We stood there for a moment, watching our kids as they ran around the schoolyard, laughing and playing, oblivious to the struggles of the adults in their lives. Emily looked over at me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to reach out to you. I know what it's like, going through something like this. If you ever need to talk, or just not feel so alone, let me know." I was surprised by her offer but also touched. I had spent so much time isolating myself, I hadn't even considered that there might be people in my life who understood what I was going through. People who wanted to help. "I might take you up on that," I said, and I meant it. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I began talking more. It started with casual conversations at school pickup and drop-off. But soon we found ourselves texting and meeting up for coffee. She never pried, never pushed me to talk about the past, but she was there when I needed someone to listen. There was something easy about being around her, something comforting. She didn't judge me for the choices I had made and didn't treat me like I was broken. Instead, she seemed to see me for who I was now, not for the mistakes or the mess I had been before. And for the first time since the whole nightmare had begun, I felt like I could breathe again. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emily invited me over for dinner. It wasn't a date, at least not officially, but there was something unspoken between us, something we hadn't acknowledged yet but both felt. The kids played in the backyard while we sat on her porch, talking about everything and nothing. "I'm glad we've reconnected," Emily said, looking out at the sunset. "It's been nice, having someone to talk to who understands." "Yeah," I agreed, glancing over at her. "It's been good for me too. I didn't realize how much I needed this." She smiled softly. "We all need someone to lean on sometimes, Josh. Even when we think we don't." There was a long pause, a comfortable silence that stretched between us. I didn't know what the future held, whether this connection with Emily would grow into something more, or if it was simply the friendship I needed right now. But whatever it was, it felt like the first real step forward. As the evening wore on, the kids ran back inside, their laughter filling the house. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I was ready to look ahead. Things with Emily moved slowly, and that was just how I wanted it. We were two people trying to rebuild our lives, both of us carrying the weight of past failures and hurts. Neither of us was in a rush to complicate things. Still, there was no denying the growing connection between us. What started as occasional conversations over coffee had turned into dinners, late-night texts, and moments where we found ourselves just enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. One Saturday afternoon, Emily invited me and the kids to join her and her son, Liam, at a local park. The weather was perfect, warm with a light breeze. The kids immediately took off toward the playground, leaving the two of us sitting on a bench, watching them as they ran around. "You know, it's been nice," Emily said, her voice soft. "Being able to talk to someone who gets it. It's hard to explain to people who haven't gone through it. The loneliness, the feeling like you've failed somehow." I glanced over at her, recognizing the look in her eyes. It was the same one I saw in the mirror sometimes. "I know what you mean. It's like, everyone expects you to move on so quickly, but they don't understand how heavy it still feels." She nodded, then sighed. "I used to think that once I was out of my marriage, I'd feel free. That I'd be able to start over without all the baggage. But it's not that simple, is it?" "No, it's not," I agreed. "There's always something lingering. The pain, the guilt, even when you know the breakup was for the best." We sat in silence for a few moments, watching the kids play. They didn't have the same burdens we did. They were innocent, untouched by the complexities of adult life. I envied them for that. Emily broke the silence first. "I don't think we've really talked about what's happening between us." Her words hung in the air, and I felt my heart rate pick up slightly. She wasn't wrong. We hadn't addressed the subtle shift between us, the way our friendship had started to feel like something more. It was there, unspoken but undeniable. "I guess I've been avoiding it," I admitted. "Not because I don't care about you, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready to open that door again. After everything with Anna, I don't know if I'm ready for more complications." Emily smiled with a sad but understanding expression. I get that. Believe me, I do. I've been hesitant too. The last thing I want is to rush into something that neither of us is ready for. We both paused, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. I could feel the tension between us, not the bad kind, but the kind that came from standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain. I wanted to trust her, but I also knew how fragile everything was right now. I'm not asking for anything right away, Emily continued, her voice gentle. I just think we should be honest with each other. Whatever this is, it's more than just friendship, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. Her honesty caught me off guard, but it was something I had grown to appreciate about her. Emily didn't play games or hide behind pretenses. She was real, and that was something I wasn't used to after the whirlwind of lies and deceit from Anna's affair. I don't want to pretend either, I said finally. But I also don't want to mess things up. We've both been through so much, and I'd hate to ruin something good by rushing it. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Then we don't rush. We take our time and figure things out as we go. There's no rulebook for this, Josh. She was right. There was no clear path forward. No set of instructions for how to rebuild your life after it had been torn apart. We would have to figure it out on our own, step by step. For the rest of the afternoon, the conversation shifted back to lighter topics. We laughed about how much energy the kids had and joked about how we were both getting too old to keep up with them. But underneath it all, the unspoken understanding between us had changed. There was no more pretending, no more dodging the truth of what was happening. That night, after I'd tucked the kids into bed, I found myself thinking about Emily, about her smile, her kindness, the way she seemed to see me for who I was now, not just the man I used to be. I hadn't felt this way in a long time, and it scared me. But it also made me realize that maybe, just maybe, there was still room in my life for something new. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I picked up my phone and sent her a text. Hey, I've been thinking about what we talked about today. I don't know what the future looks like, but I'd like to figure it out with you. A few minutes passed before my phone buzzed with her response. Me too, Josh. One step at a time. I smiled to myself, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to hope again. I hadn't planned on seeing Anna again anytime soon, not outside the usual kids' pick-up and drop-off arrangements. We kept everything civil for their sake, but our lives had become entirely separate, a ghost of what they used to be. However, life had a way of forcing the past back into the present when you least expected it. One Friday evening, I was at home with the kids, making dinner and going through the motions of our usual routine, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, I was surprised to see Anna standing there, looking as though she had something serious on her mind. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying, and she shifted nervously on the porch, unable to meet my gaze. Josh, she started softly. Can I talk to you for a minute? I hesitated, glancing back at the kids who were sitting in the living room, oblivious to the tension building in the air. Now's not really a good time, Anna. What is it? She sighed, glancing down at her feet. It's important. It's about us, about everything. The last thing I wanted was to dredge up old wounds, but I could see in her face that she wasn't going to leave without saying what she needed to say. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and crossed my arms. Okay, go ahead. Anna took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything that happened, and I need to say something. I know I've said I'm sorry before, but I don't think I've ever really explained myself. I tensed. I didn't want to hear more excuses. I thought I had moved past this, but something about her standing there brought back the pain and anger I'd worked so hard to bury. I don't know if there's anything left to say, Anna, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. You made your choices, and I made mine. We've both got to live with that. She looked down, biting her lip, her face pale under the porch light. I know, but I need you to understand. What I did, what happened with Tom, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything else too. The distance between us, the way we stopped talking, the way we just fell apart. I wasn't happy, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I did the worst thing I could have done. I broke us instead of trying to fix us. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. They were hard to hear, but part of me knew she wasn't wrong. Our marriage hadn't been perfect, not for a long time. We had both let things fall apart, slowly, piece by piece. That didn't excuse what she did. But it did make me realize that the blame wasn't entirely hers. I get it, I said, my voice softer now. But you could have come to me. You could have talked to me before things got that bad. You didn't have to do what you did. Anna nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I ruined everything. I lost you. I lost the trust of our kids, and I destroyed my own life in the process. Her words cut deeper than I expected, but they also stirred something I hadn't felt in a long time: empathy. I had been so focused on my own pain, on my anger and my revenge, that I hadn't really thought about what Anna was going through. She had made her bed, yes, but she was also living in the wreckage of it now, just like I was. I don't hate you, Anna, I said finally, surprising myself with the truth of it. I don't think I ever really did. I was angry and hurt, but I don't hate you. I don't know how we come back from this. She wiped her eyes, nodding. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry, truly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'll always regret what I did to us. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of anger or resentment. It was just sadness. Sadness for what we had lost, for the family we had once been. I appreciate you saying that, I replied, taking a deep breath. But we're both moving on now. For the kids, we have to make peace with that. Anna nodded again, a small, sad smile on her face. I know. Thank you for listening, Josh. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the cool evening air, feeling lighter somehow. The past was behind me, and for the first time, I truly believed it. The conversation with Anna lingered in my mind for days. It hadn't changed anything between us, but it had given me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like I could finally move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. Emily and I continued to spend time together, slowly building something real between us. We were both cautious, both still healing from our respective pasts, but there was an undeniable ease to being around her. It felt different from anything I'd experienced before, calmer, more grounded. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I invited Emily over for dinner. It was the first time we'd spent time together without the kids around, and there was a quiet intimacy to it that made me feel like we were crossing some invisible line into new territory. We ate on the back porch, the soft glow of string lights illuminating the yard as we talked about everything from work to parenting to the latest show we'd both been binge-watching. But beneath the casual conversation, there was an undercurrent of something more, a question that had been hanging between us for weeks. After dinner, we sat on the porch swing, the air cool and crisp around us. Emily leaned back, gazing up at the stars. You know, I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel ready for something like this again. She said quietly. After my marriage ended, I thought I'd sworn off relationships for good. I glanced over at her, feeling the same uncertainty but also the same pull. Yeah, I get that. I never thought I'd be here again either. Everything feels fragile, like it could break at any moment. Emily nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. It does. But maybe that's why we have to be careful with it. Maybe fragile things can still grow into something strong. Her words hung in the air. And for the first time, I felt the urge to take that leap, to stop holding back, to stop second-guessing myself. Life had thrown enough punches at me. Maybe it was time to start believing in something good again. I reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. I don't know what the future looks like, I said, echoing the conversation we'd had before. But I want to figure it out with you. One step at a time, like we said. Emily smiled, her eyes soft and understanding. One step at a time. We sat there for a long time, holding hands in the quiet of the night, not needing to say anything more. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The future was uncertain, but it didn't feel as terrifying as it once had. Maybe this was what moving on really looked like, not erasing the past, but learning to carry it in a way that didn't break you. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope in that. As the stars shimmered above us, I realized that I was ready to take that chance. I was ready to let go of the past and take a leap of faith into whatever the future had in store. I thought I was done with Tom. After he lost his job, I figured that was the end of it. The perfect revenge. He was humiliated, the school board had severed ties with him, and he'd be lucky to find another job in education. It should have been enough. But as the days went by, I realized that the damage wasn't contained to just him. People started to talk. Small towns thrive on gossip, and the scandal spread far beyond the school. Some of the parents had pieced things together. Word got around that Anna's affair was with the school principal, and suddenly, she was in the crosshairs. What started as a personal vendetta had spiraled into a public disaster. And the worst part? It was affecting the kids. I first noticed it when Maddie came home from school unusually quiet. Normally, she'd chatter on about her day, about her friends and teachers, but that day, she barely said a word. She pushed her food around her plate at dinner, her face pale and her eyes downcast. When I finally asked her what was wrong, she hesitated. "Daddy, some kids at school, they said things," she murmured, her voice trembling. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" They said Mom is a bad person. That she did something wrong, and that's why Mr. Davenport isn't at school anymore." I stared at her, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I knew that adults would talk and that rumors would spread. But I hadn't anticipated how it would trickle down to the kids. Maddie didn't need to know the details of what had happened between her mother and Tom, but now, she was caught in the crossfire. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maddie, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. But that doesn't mean they're bad people. Your mom loves you very much, and nothing that happened between her and Mr. Davenport has anything to do with you. You understand that, right?" She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. The hurt that she didn't fully understand. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. I had wanted to make Tom pay for what he did, but in doing so, I had dragged Anna, and by extension, our kids, into a mess they didn't deserve to be in. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of guilt that had settled in my chest. The satisfaction I had felt from bringing Tom down had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that my actions had consequences far beyond what I had intended. After leaving the school, I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind racing. I thought about all the ways I had tried to regain control over my life after Anna's betrayal, and how I had convinced myself that revenge was the answer. But now, seeing the fallout, I wasn't so sure. I ended up parking outside Emily's house without really thinking about it. She was the one person who had been a steady presence throughout all of this, and I needed to talk to her, to figure out what to do next. Emily opened the door, surprised to see me so early in the day. "Josh, is everything okay?" I walked inside, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "It's not okay. None of this is okay. Maddie, she came home yesterday, and kids were saying things about Anna, about Tom. I thought I was doing the right thing by getting back at him, but now, I don't know. It's all gone too far." Emily frowned, her brow creased with concern. "Josh, I knew this was going to be messy, but I didn't realize it would affect the kids like this." I didn't either," I admitted, sinking onto her couch. "I didn't think about how this would impact them. I just wanted to make him pay, to make sure he didn't get away with what he did. But now, I feel like I've made everything worse." She sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm. "Revenge has a way of doing that. It feels good at the moment, but the aftermath, it's never as clean as you think it'll be." I nodded, knowing she was right. I had been so focused on my anger, on getting even, that I hadn't considered the ripple effects. Now, I was stuck in the aftermath, trying to figure out how to clean up the mess I had helped create. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice low. Emily was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Maybe it's time to stop looking backward. You've dealt with Tom, and he's out of the picture. But Anna, the kids still need her in their lives, and they need you to be the steady one. They need to know that, no matter what, you're going to be there for them. Not caught up in this mess anymore." Her words hit home. I had been so consumed by what had happened that I hadn't fully focused on what the kids needed most: stability. They didn't care about revenge or justice. They just wanted their parents to be okay, to be there for them. I took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. "You're right. It's time to move on. Time to focus on the kids, and on us." Emily smiled softly, squeezing my hand. "One step at a time, remember?" I managed a small smile. "Yeah, one step at a time." It wasn't going to be easy to put everything behind me, but I knew I had to try. The revenge I had sought had brought more pain than closure, and now it was time to let go, to finally start rebuilding, not just for me, but for the kids, and for whatever future Emily and I might have together. And with that decision, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift, just a little. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. It wasn't long before the consequences of everything caught up with me. I knew they would eventually. After my conversation with Emily, I had been trying to focus on the future, on being there for the kids, but there was still this lingering tension in the air. A sense that things weren't fully over yet. Then it happened. I was at home, sitting at the kitchen table and flipping through some bills when my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. At first, I ignored it, figuring it was another telemarketer. But then it rang again. This time, I picked it up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice cautious. "Mr. Harper, this is Detective Clark from the local police department. We need to speak with you about a matter involving Thomas Davenport. Are you available to come down to the station?" My stomach dropped. What could this be about now? The revenge, the confrontation. Hadn't that been the end of it? The last thing I wanted was to get tangled up in legal drama, but I knew I had no choice. I agreed to meet the detective, my mind spinning with possibilities. When I arrived at the station, Detective Clark met me in a small, dimly lit interview room. He was a tall, middle-aged man with a serious expression, the kind of guy who had seen it all and wasn't easily fooled. "Mr. Harper," he began, after offering me a seat, "we've received a complaint from Thomas Davenport. He's accusing you of slander and claims you deliberately set out to ruin his reputation by spreading false information. His legal team is looking into a potential defamation lawsuit." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. A lawsuit? Slander? After everything he had done, now he wanted to turn the tables on me. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "That man destroyed my marriage, wrecked my family, and now he's playing the victim." Detective Clark leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I understand this is a complicated situation, Mr. Harper, but the allegations against him, about abusing his position, haven't been substantiated by any solid evidence. The school board conducted an investigation and didn't find anything conclusive. His dismissal may have been swift, but it appears it was more of a precautionary measure than an acknowledgement of wrongdoing." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. So that was it? Tom had managed to worm his way out of facing the real consequences of his actions, and now he was coming after me. The injustice of it all made me want to punch something, but I knew I had to stay level-headed. "So what does this mean for me?" I asked, my hands clenched into fists under the table. "Well, at this point, it's just a complaint. Davenport's legal team will decide whether or not to proceed with a formal lawsuit. But if they do, you'll be facing serious legal ramifications, financial and personal. My advice? You might want to talk to a lawyer." I left the station feeling numb. Everything I had done to take Tom down, all the steps I had taken to expose him, it was turning against me. I had wanted revenge, and now it looked like that revenge was coming back with a vengeance of its own. As I drove home, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if he really did sue me? What if I ended up in court, dragged through the mud, losing everything? The kids, the house, even Emily, it could all crumble if things went wrong. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I called Emily. I needed her voice, her calm, steady presence to help ground me in the chaos that was threatening to overwhelm my life. When she answered, I could hear the concern in her voice right away. "Josh, what's going on? You sound tense." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "It's Tom. He's coming after me with a lawsuit. Slander, defamation, the whole 9 yards." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Emily processing the information. "I knew he wouldn't go quietly," she finally said. "But we'll figure this out. You don't have to face this alone." Her words were comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. As the weeks went by, the tension only mounted. Tom's legal team had officially filed the lawsuit, and the papers arrived one cold afternoon when I was least expecting it. Seeing my name on those documents, Joshua Harper, the defendant, sent a chill down my spine. The reality of it was sinking in, and fast. I met with a lawyer the next day, a sharp but surprisingly compassionate woman named Karen Ford. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "You've got a fight ahead of you," Karen told me, after reviewing the details. "The burden of proof will be on Davenport's team to show that you intentionally spread false information to harm his reputation. But that doesn't mean this will be easy. Defamation cases can be tricky." I felt the weight of it all bearing down on me. I had already lost so much: my marriage, my sense of stability, and now I was facing the very real possibility of losing even more. But what made it worse was the way the lawsuit affected the kids. Maddie and Ethan had picked up on the tension. And even though I tried to shield them from the worst of it, they were old enough to sense that something was wrong. Maddie started asking more questions, trying to understand why people were talking about her mom and Mr. Davenport. "Daddy, is it true what they're saying about Mom?" she asked one evening, her big brown eyes filled with worry. "Did she do something bad?" I knelt down, looking her in the eyes, trying to find the right words. "Maddie, what happened between your mom and Mr. Davenport is complicated, but that doesn't change how much she loves you, or how much I love you. We're both doing our best to keep things normal for you and Ethan, okay?" She nodded, but I could see the confusion and hurt lingering in her expression. And that's when I realized that no matter what happened with the lawsuit, no matter how things played out in court, the real damage was already being done, to the kids, to our family. Emily was my rock through it all. She came over more often, helping with the kids, bringing meals, and offering support in any way she could. But even she couldn't fully ease the burden of what I was facing. Every night, after the kids went to bed, we would sit on the couch together, talking through the legal strategy, the emotional toll it was taking, and what the future might look like. One evening, after a particularly long day of dealing with lawyers and paperwork, I sat with Emily on the back porch, staring up at the stars. The quiet was peaceful, but my mind was anything but. "Do you ever think," I started, my voice heavy, "that maybe I made a mistake? That going after Tom the way I did was wrong?" Emily was silent for a moment, her hand resting gently on mine. "I think you did what you thought was right at the time. You were hurt and angry, and you wanted to protect your family. There's no shame in that. But maybe now, it's time to let go of the fight." Her words hung in the air, and I knew she was right. I had been holding on to my anger for so long, using it as a shield, as fuel to keep going, that I hadn't realized how much it was destroying me from the inside out. It was time to stop. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "I've been so wrapped up in this for so long, I don't know how to let it go." Emily leaned in closer, her voice soft but firm. "You can, Josh. You have to. For the kids, for yourself. Tom's not worth losing everything over." I looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. She was right. It was time to let go of the anger, the revenge, the need to win. It was time to focus on what really mattered, my kids, my future, and the chance at happiness that Emily and I were building together. With a deep breath, I made a decision. I was going to fight the lawsuit, yes, but I was done letting Tom control my life. I was done letting the past dictate my future. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. The day of the court hearing came quicker than I expected. My lawyer, Karen, had prepped me for weeks, going over every possible scenario and every question that might come up. But no amount of preparation could fully ease the anxiety gnawing at me. This was it, the culmination of everything, the affair, the revenge, the fallout. It all led to this one moment. As I stood outside the courthouse, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all on my shoulders. Emily was there with me, her hand slipping into mine as we walked inside. The support she had given me over the past few months was the only thing that had kept me sane. I squeezed her hand, silently grateful for her steady presence. Inside the courtroom, Tom Davenport sat at the plaintiff's table, his expensive lawyer beside him. He looked different now, older, tired, and worn down by everything that had happened. He didn't meet my eyes, but I could feel the bitterness rolling off him. He still blamed me for everything that had happened to him, his career, his reputation, his life falling apart. But as I sat down and looked around the room, I realized something important. This wasn't about Tom anymore. I had spent months obsessing over him, trying to destroy him the way he had destroyed my marriage, but now, I saw it for what it was. Tom was just a man, flawed, selfish, and broken, just like me. And in that moment, I felt the anger I had held onto for so long finally start to fade. The hearing dragged on, with both sides presenting their arguments. Karen was sharp, dismantling the defamation claims with precision. She pointed out the facts. I hadn't lied about Tom's affair with Anna. And I hadn't fabricated the accusations about his professional misconduct. What I had done was personal, not illegal. When it was my turn to take the stand, I spoke honestly. I admitted to my actions, how I had gone after Tom out of anger and hurt, how I had wanted to make him pay for what he did to my family. But I also made it clear that I never lied about the affair, and that I never intended for things to spiral the way they had. As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't about winning anymore, it was about finally putting everything on the table. About accepting what had happened and letting it go. After hours of testimony, arguments, and cross-examinations, the judge finally made her ruling. Tom's defamation case was dismissed. There wasn't enough evidence to prove that I had maliciously slandered him. It was over. But the victory felt different than I had imagined. There was no satisfaction, no triumphant moment. Just relief that the fight was finally over. Outside the courthouse, Karen shook my hand, congratulating me on the win. But all I could think about was moving forward, about what came next. Emily stood beside me, a small smile on her face as she wrapped her arms around me. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, but I couldn't find the words. The months of stress, anger, and heartache had drained me, but in that moment, with Emily by my side, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. As we walked to the car, I looked at her and said, "It's over." She smiled, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Yeah, it is." In the days that followed, life slowly started to return to normal, or at least, as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The kids seemed lighter, less weighed down by the tension that had been hanging over us for so long. Maddie started talking more, laughing again. And Ethan, well, he was just happy to have both of his parents still in his life. As for Anna, things between us were civil. We didn't talk about the past anymore, didn't dredge up the affair or the revenge. We had both made mistakes and now, we were just trying to co-parent as best as we could for the kids' sake. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Emily and I grew closer in the aftermath of it all. She had been my rock through the storm, and now, with the chaos behind us, we finally had a chance to build something real. It wasn't easy, we both had our scars, our baggage, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. One evening, months after the court case, I found myself sitting on the porch with Emily, a soft breeze blowing through the trees. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, and the world seemed calm and peaceful. "I never thought I'd get here," I admitted, looking out at the horizon. "After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again." Emily smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You've been through a lot, Josh. But you're stronger for it. And now, you've got a chance to start over. With the kids. With me." I turned to look at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. For so long, I had been focused on the past, on the betrayal, the anger, the need for revenge. But now, sitting there with Emily, I realized something important: the past didn't have to define me anymore. I could let it go. I could move forward. "Yeah," I said softly, wrapping my arm around her. "I think I'm ready for that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The fight was over, the wounds were healing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally moving in the right direction. Towards a future that was mine to build.